While that last video rendered, I went ahead and reordered the layer comp so we go from dark to light. And you got a decision to make. Do you like these? Do you not like them? Which ones do you want to save? And you certainly don't have to save them all. I happen to think that is a pretty cool texture. The inverse of this would also be cool, and we'll get there because we still have threshold and inverse to add, and then the adjustment layers for the inverse version of these textures, because we don't just want straight inverse, because we can always invert whatever texture we've created. So more variety is what we're looking for. But back to our regularly scheduled program, which is saving out these textures. If you really want to do it at this point, well, let's get back to actions, because we should go ahead and make a layer above everything else where we can stamp visible. And so with the uppermost layer selected, with the bottommost action selected, let's click on the new action icon and call it something clever like textures folder and hit return. Now we're starting to record. Uppermost layer is active. We're going to come down to the folder, hold down option, click on it, call this textures. And because that arrow's facing downward, if we option click on the new layer icon, it will go inside this folder. If this icon is, this little twirly's closed and we option click, it will go above that folder. We want these to be inside this folder, so we twirl that downward. And option click to create a new layer. Now, we would name it here normally, but this is part of an action. Let's just click OK so we have a blank layer sitting there, and stop our action so that we have something that creates a texture folder and a blank layer for us to work with. Because we're thinking not just for this file, we're thinking for all files. Now, yes, we could have made a whole bunch of these layers, but why? And we're going to be naming them in the future, because if I want to create a texture that, let's turn that visibility icon on because otherwise this won't work. If we want to create, oh, that's why this is off, because it's part of that action set. Interesting. So we have this selected, right? Now we can turn this eyeball on. This goes to last document state, which is where we were, which is just fine. And then we can stamp visible. Shift Option Command E will give us this layer comp, but let's name it right, 1A, 2E, so we know where this came from. We don't have to hunt and peck, because believe me, we are going to have a lot more complicated names in this stack by the time we're done. Because the idea isn't to save every single one of these, it's to save the ones we think are useful. And if, for instance, I'm just going to return to commit that right there, we can close that and turn that off, because if this is on, any changes we make, hey look, let's look at this one. Look at that, it turns that off. Well, how sweet that is that we don't have to remember to turn that off. And let's say, do we really like this? And if we don't, well, 1A, 2B, inside levels, 2B, right there. What can we do with this? What can make that more interesting? How about that? And if we like that, we go ahead and close that, come back to our layer comp, and update that particular version of the layer comp. And then, are we still going light? That got suddenly darker. That one. Now these are getting pretty close together. This is where you juggle. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of gray in this. So I don't really like 2B as much as I could compared to that other one. So what happens? How can we minimize that gray and maximize the visual interest? Now, if we take that and update 2B, what's it look like in comparison to the next one? Well, suddenly it is darker than 2C, but lighter than 2D. So we can drag this down and move through. And again, season to taste. Are these too close? Well, lighten it up. This is one of those dances you do as you're perfecting your textures. We started with all those default settings. There is no reason in the universe to save a default setting that doesn't look good. We can always recreate those. This is a matter of playing and then dancing back and forth between layers, trying to figure out what looks good, what works best, what you want to save, and how you move on. We will eventually move these textures out of this folder probably into individual files. Or not. We'll talk about that because this is definitely a work in progress. I hope you begin to see where this is heading because we have a lot more layers to add and a lot more flexibility to build in to this one set of actions that's going to create our super texture modifier, whatever we're going to call this action, in order to generate as many useful actions as is possible. All right. Have fun with this, and I look forward to part 3.